Hey folks, Jeff from Corrugated Cavalier here. I've had a few people asking about how they can train footwork solo, and it's something that I do pretty much every day. To me it's very valuable because I like to fight dagger, different types of sword, spear, and also wrestling and stuff like that. So to me footwork is one of the most efficient ways to train for all of those, really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a list of some basic steps and turns that are really in most systems, in most martial systems. I am going to mostly stick to Fiore, but I will do some German stuff as well. I will try to use English terms, but also I will use Fiore terms for sure. Before the steps, Fiore's stance is a bit like this, wide enough that you're stable, but not so wide that it's hard to move quickly. I typically view it as most of the weight is on the front leg because usually the heel is shown off the ground. If it's on the ground, I'm not really bothered as long as the weight is not there, okay? And this is the typical stance. So there are really only 4 steps that he describes in detail in words. So let's go through those. We have acrese, and this is a half step in a lot of systems. It can be straightforward, or it can be offline, either foot, right? The rear foot can also acrese and come along with, and then you can fully move forward without passing. If you do that backwards, it is called descrese, okay? Both are used all over the place. In Dente di Scambiardi, for a sword, he'll like say to take a thrust with a step forward and then cut with a step back and like returning to the same guard. So it sounds like he wants you to acrese, descrese with those actions. Passing steps in everything, of course, it's pretty much walking, right? So in Fiore it's called passare. Backwards is tornare. I don't typically practice that one in isolation because it's pretty much walking. So then we have his turns that he describes. One of the most valuable is the volta stabile, and that's when you shift your weight and turn your body to play on the other side. So I'm playing over there, I'm playing over there. This is really useful for power generation. If you're cutting, if you're throwing somebody, whatever. I do practice this one in isolation quite a bit. Plus Fiore has a lot of back-weighted stances, so if my opponent's over there, I'll be in a back-weighted stance. And with just a weight shift, I can all of a sudden be quite a bit closer, right? That's volta stabile. I would definitely practice that with both feet forward. Then there is mezza volta, which kind of looks like a passing step, but if you notice, now my hips are in a different orientation. With a standard passing step, my hips are staying straight forward. With a mezza volta, they're kind of coming in. And usually when I'm cutting somebody or doing almost any kind of attack, I'm probably going to use a mezza volta. And the last turn that he describes is a tutta volta, which is when one foot turns around the other. He doesn't specify degree, so it could be really small, or it could be really big. You'll also hear people call this a compass step or sometimes a triangle step, and it's very useful in Fiore and pretty much any art, really. There is one more that I want to talk about. A lot of viewers will probably disagree with me on this one, but it's this transverse step, and he doesn't ever actually describe it, but his description of footwork is very limited. So this step here, where I'm stepping across the center line, but I'm keeping my hips oriented forward instead of away. Some people will say that this is unstable because your feet are crossed. It's somewhat true, not as unstable as you think, as long as you're doing it correctly. So I would practice that and kind of sink into it and find where you're stable. And really any step you're unstable for a moment. So if I'm passing step, if somebody pushes me from either forward or a little over here while I'm doing that passing step, I'm probably going to go over, right? So I wouldn't worry about it too much. So my thought for this being in Fiore's system is actually from the very, very first 2 plays in the book, in the Getty especially. It's drawn like this pretty clearly. So in Abrazare, your first play, you're checking elbow, and you're going to arm lock somebody or shoulder lock somebody. As you do that, this leg steps through, and the legs are shown like this. So he doesn't really describe it in words, and it is a specific application, but it is literally also the first step in the book as well. So there are some more complex types of footwork that are especially for Fiore, though I don't think that they would be out of place in other systems. One of my favorites is the Scambiardi Punta footwork, so I'm going to just hold the sword up here for a minute. And that's an accrese offline, passing offline. That's the main part of it. So what's happening is I'm using that accrese to give a little momentum and mass to deflecting a thrust, and I'm exchanging their thrust and giving a thrust of my own with this passing step. So it's accrese, passing step. Accrese, passing step. You notice this is very offline footwork. To get back online, and if you miss the thrust, he tells you to grab their sword hand and stab them. So basically pass, and he wants you to take another passing step, grab their sword hand, and stab them. The way that I do this to make it a little bit more useful for a lot of different situations is to do a tuta volta at the end as well. So accrese, passare, and then I'll do kind of more of a mezza volta instead of a passing step, because I'm thinking about my opponent being here. Once again, having that reference is nice. And then tuta volta. And I like this because it kind of sets you up for grappling and stuff like that, because you're probably going to be pretty close to your opponent after that. Here, so I just did my thrust. I'm going to use abrazare post up. So if I step in here and think about grabbing their head or arm, and tuta volta, into iron door down here, you can see a throw emerging out of that, I think, in my opinion. Make sure to do it on both sides, so boom, 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 boom. There's another kind of complex pattern. Comes from the sword and armor section, possibly dagger as well. I have my right foot forward, I'm going to step offline, and then mezza volta back in. Okay? And you can add something else to the end of that if you want. So offline accrese, mezza volta back in. Maybe you want to add another accrese at the end of that. Maybe you want to go back instead. Boom, boom. Okay? So these are more complex patterns, but we need to train these as well, not just the basics, so that they can come out cleanly in spar. So speaking of how to train them, what I usually do is I do some in isolation. Like I said, I don't do a lot of passing steps in isolation because it's basically walking. I will do accrese and descrese in isolation though, for sure. I usually do 3 forward and 3 back. Do it slow at first so you can really feel using the balls of your feet to get some speed. Of course, do both sides, right? And then also pick up the pace. So you want to use this stuff in sparring, you need to go at that level. You need to train at that intensity as well. So try not to mess up the center line, okay? And do, of course, the other side as well. So this is really the fundamental thing about training the footwork is I'm going to say do it slow first and on both sides to really focus on the mechanics, and then speed it up, do it on both sides. A lot of times I do like 5 each side, slow and then fast, and that seems to be working out pretty well for me. And then do some of those more complex, you start combining steps. So one that I really like is accrese, passare, is really good for thrust work. Sometimes you want to be linear and gain a lot of ground, right? And do it exactly mirrored the way back. Passare, descrese, descrese. So half step, passing step, passing step, half step, half step. Do it both sides and do it fast, right? You can you can do a lot of mixtures of those too. You can do accrese, passare, accrese, right? And then back. Yeah. That can start looking like the Scambiardi Punta footwork a lot, especially if you just take it offline a little bit. So make some combinations that you think are going to be useful for you, or just play around with some, even if you don't think you're going to use that exact combination in fighting, that's okay. Definitely do practice those more complex ones as well. So I do Scambiardi Punta and that sword and armor or that dagger footwork pretty much every day. So on the Scambiardi Punta footwork, I'm going to apese, passare, mezza volta, tutta volta. And now I'm set up just to do it in a different direction, right? Boom, boom, boom. And you see me using some abbracciare posta in there as well. That's just something that I do. I think it helps. If that's something that sounds good to you, I would recommend that as well. And then the sword and armor one, I do the same way, right? So that's all the Fiore stuff that I typically do. I might add in something else here and there. But yeah, that's mostly what I do. Sometimes I isolate different specific movements. Sometimes I go more for the complex patterns. Kind of depends on what I feel like I need to work on. So some of the German specific stuff that my club does that's also good to train is one is a gathering step where your feet come together and then you step. So what's really nice about this is now I can go in any direction, right? So I can kind of like move toward my opponent, and you saw I stepped offline kind of out of habit, and I can now move any direction. I can kind of wait for a split second to see what's happening. Maybe I want to continue this way. Maybe instead I need to go this way, or maybe I need to go straight forward. Or maybe I decide, nope, I'm going right back to where I was. So this gathering step is really useful because you can go any direction, right? And that exactly perfectly lateral move as well. There's also, I think this is probably, I actually don't know the source, but that transverse step I think is in some German sources as well. Somebody hit me up with that. I'm sure some people out there know where that comes from, or if it's detailed in some source specifically. And last but not least, the springen is one of the coolest German steps, and one that I like to use and probably should use more often. We're just literally springing to the side. So it's like kind of an athletic kind of jumping movement, or at least that's how we do it, to the side, right? Practicing this is very good. Getting you offline once again, right? And this is really important for your Punta. So this is the first place it comes up, I believe. Springing off to the side, Punta, and then a false edge cut. It's almost like a little tutta volta that I did there, but it's mostly my back leg. Feels like kind of baling hay after that springing. And I was coming forward a little bit too, but it's really jumping off the side. I'm moving a little forward. And then it's like baling hay for that false edge cut. I'm sure that there have been a lot of arguments about this online over the years, but you know, I don't see why you can't. That was terrible. I don't see why you can't do it this way too. That seems totally fine to me. And really, we should be doing it with Zwerchhau too if you read the texts. It definitely mentions springing to the side. So you should definitely be springing to the side for Zwerchhau. So I'm crossing this center line with every step. If you want to do it exactly by how the glosses describe it. Okay, so that came out a little longer than I intended, but basically here's the thing. Isolate the movements for the system that you do. Practice those slowly on both sides, practice them quickly on both sides. Then build some more complex patterns, sometimes just mixing the steps. That Scambiardi Punta one that I do for Fiore has pretty much almost every step and turn you can imagine in his system in that one move. So I do that one a lot, right? And then, you know, be consistent about it. Like, if you get 10 minutes of footwork in, just footwork, every practice section, I think you'll notice a big change quickly. If you have any specific questions, please shoot them down in the comments below, or just a discussion of how do you train footwork. Leave it in the comments below. It'd be great to get a discussion about this stuff going. Thank you all for coming by the channel. Once again, be good to each other, and ciao.